يناقش معنا اليوم فنان البينالي جيف أوبنهايمر ممارسته الفنية والطريقة التي تتشكل بها الممارسات القائمة على الصور وكيف تتأثر بالتراكيب الاجتماعية. Enjoy the talk.
My name is Geof Oppenheimer. I was born in California and I live now in Chicago. I'm a pretty traditional sculptor. I was trained in a 19th century, almost artisanal tradition of metal casting. I work in a lot of different materials now. I work with capacities that are beyond my own technical ability, but I maintain a kind of traditional romantic belief that art's capacities are far more than just retinal pleasure. I think profoundly that art can ask and answer questions of what it means to be a member of a community, whether that community is local, national, or global. And to drill into that even more, how do we define value? One of my teachers told me that a good artist just keeps on making the same work of art over and over and over again, just asking the same questions with different modalities. And I make good art and I make bad art, but I think fundamentally that is the primary question that I'm interested in asking. So then the question is, how do we do this? How do we develop what value means? And for me, I believe and honestly hope to recuperate the value of symbolism in contemporary art. Symbolism, rather than overtness or language, surfaces our inherent emotional life in an object, right? A la this guy, Carl Jung, that we take the stuff of our world and imbue it with value. That is what an enormous part, and I would argue an untended, an untended part of what the human animal's capacities are. And in my work, I believe that a formal value is a social value. All the things we're surrounded by, all the things we have near us are pushed both consciously and subconsciously with meaning. And an artist's job is almost in a linguistic fashion to mix and match these things that we are surrounded by into new values. So let's look at some examples. I'll start here. This is a project from about 4 years ago entitled The Therapy of Groups. These are large photographs about 6 feet tall. I'm an American, so I can't do the meters conversion, I apologize. But about 6 feet tall by 4.5 wide, something like that. Here we have large color photographs held onto screens with magnets. These images are conditional. They embody dancers that I worked with a dance company in Chicago, flexing themselves into different poses, different configurations. Social relations are in themselves conditional. Your enemy is your friend becomes your enemy. Rather than fixed and framed, they are held together with magnets. Each time they're exhibited, I come up with new ways of display, just as the positions themselves kind of embody different formal and social relations between the protagonists in the images. Oh, I should also say, I think they have questions at the end, but because it's a small group, I would really love it if anyone has any questions, just start talking and we'll take it from there. Especially fellow artists like technical stuff, I love talking about that stuff. I'll talk about this a little later, but maybe perhaps hyperbolically, I kind of believe there's no such thing as abstraction. Or if there is abstraction, it's kind of a negative in my mind. And so I would say that images can be affirmative, they can be whatever the opposite of affirmative would be, they can be pretty, they can be ugly, but they can't really be abstract. I just kind of just don't buy it. And so in my work, I'm always sort of interested in the relationship between not so much abstraction, but the relationship between aesthetics and beauty and value. Labor and the position of labor, actually just to kind of analyze myself in public, is becoming increasingly important in my work. And this is the beginning of that. This is a relatively old piece that, in my mind, relates to the work in the biennial, which is why I put it in. It's entitled The Embarrassing Statue. I see it as both a self-portrait and a portrait of labor in a time where its value is becoming contested and ambiguous. It conflates the sartorial trappings of intellectual labor. You have the Brooks Brothers pants around the ankles, along with the anonymous body of physical labor typically done by lower levels of the economic strata with the leaf blower. Physical labor is become dematerialized in a time when everything is become dematerialized. Economic value is no longer about physical production, as it was and where I live, our economy was based upon. Now it's information, liquidity, and transfer, and more or less arbitrage, where profit is to be garnered. So this is a little bit of me, right? I'll be the first to admit it. I was thinking a lot about the role of making in sculpture when I was making this. And I see it slightly as half Freudian analysis, half Marxist indictment of the role of making. It also reminds me of thinking about good behavior. Like, what is the role of art in modeling what is right and what is valued in a society? And does art always have to champion the right way to behave? Or can it also poke a finger at maybe the lesser aspects that we have, the things that we're not proud of? Can art be a tool to process those? Or is it mainly a tool to affirm? And this is, again, is something I'll come back to in a little bit. Part of the statue is healed, right? So I built this sort of abstract frame of the body, and part of the weld, rather than being welded, I bound it with a plaster bandage, the same as you would a bone. The whole thing is steel that is electroplated in gold. Part of my practice is drawing. I do a lot of drawing, and I'll show a couple, and it's more just to bring you in, I suppose. I draw every morning, almost always. And sometimes the drawings are like a drawing of the thing, right? I'll like figure out the length and the height and so forth. But more often than not, they're atmospheric. They sort of help me figure out the forms and the shapes. So here at the top right, you have a very old image of an allegory of poverty, along with that sort of long diagonal line that became the leaf blower in this instance. So over a process of iteration, they become more and more aligned with the sculptural form. You know, monuments, which I think about a lot, monuments are made for two reasons. They're either made to remember of a loss, typically a death or something like that, or they're made so we never forget, right? Those are the two things. And I think, especially the work in the biennial and this project, which is why I put it in, I'm interested in trying to navigate a terrain of sculpture, especially that sort of hovers in between the two. And maybe that puts us in the present, right? Like, how can you memorialize the present is the kind of Sisyphean task that I'm kind of asking of myself in the studio. Like pathetically heroic, actually. Like I said, trained as a sculptor, and I would argue till I'm blue in the face that all the stuff I'm showing you today is sculpture. Having said that, theatrical drama is something I think about a lot. Even the kind of theater of the work I produced across the street. And one of the reasons I like theater is theater from time eternal has been used to ask social questions all over the world. Chinese opera, classical Greek drama, so on and so forth. There's something fundamental about watching individuals act out problems in a society, almost as a case study of what you are encountering outside the theater walls. And that's typically how I use video, which we're going to look at some now. The last project, my right before COVID pandemic project, was a commissioned video at the Columbus Museum of Art. And it occupied an entire beautifully like 19th century proportioned room in a kind of old gallery. And a large monitor was suspended on a piece of steel square stock about yay big, on which played this video entitled 20th Century Hustlers.
All of it, all the information, it was assembled here.
Was retrieved and aggregated on site, so as far as I know, it was all done here. But there are failures and reluctance to give names to them. They think it'll become fear. We've been taught to think of them as small islands, rubber bands.
That can't be right. I'd be shocked if it wasn't removed to a subcontractor someplace else, someplace hot, unstable, and dry. These things here, they're symptoms.
Remember, we worked with your predecessors. That guy that was talking about the system's architecture before the directors arrived, if I understood him correctly, all the work was to be done on site. They've been waiting for your decisions for too long. If you don't reply with something soon, I'm going to have to move on my own. I'm not so sure that's best. You taught me never to half-step. No half-steppin'.
So that is a short clip of about a 18-minute video. It's told in 2 chapters. The first chapter, the 3 protagonists in the backseat of a Lincoln town car, which is within the American culture like the de facto corporate car of the 20th century, where business jargon becomes a sort of like ocular poetry. I worked on the language with a poet. He and I wrote it together, and it kind of flows through different ideas of meaning. But what you become increasingly aware of as the video progresses is that the man is losing control. He is losing his accrued historical power under loss of agency with the means of production. Like I said, I'm from Chicago. Chicago is a booming, gleaming metropolis. It is surrounded by an industrial wasteland that has been emptied out at the end of the 20th century. The area around Chicago, the American Midwest, it was for decades and decades the center of industrial production in the United States and perhaps the world. That is no longer. And there is a profound sense of displacement there. Many of the problems we've all seen in the United States emanate from that loss of agency. And I was really interested, and so Ohio, where this project was commissioned, is ground zero for a lot of that. I was really interested in kind of poking a finger and turning into a kind of elegy, a poetic elegy for the place of, I'll just be really direct, of masculinity under a time when the historical privilege and pride of labor is melting away in a kind of Marxist sense, becoming air. So that is done in 2 chapters. This is the opening shot. I was also, as an aside for other artists, I was really interested, I mean, maybe this is a little bit of a cliche, but drones fascinate me, right? The change in ocular ability of a drone is something I was really interested in. Specifically registration. Like, as you see in the clip I showed you, a lot of it, the drone is literally trying to see, trying to focus, and that technology, whether it's military or commercial, is something that I was really sort of formally jazzed by. And obviously the office chairs can be moved around to watch it. The second chapter is static. The first chapter, as you saw, it's very kinetic. There's lots of like gyroscopic shots and so forth. The second chapter is 2 men of a certain age in a family restaurant as the camera slowly, over the course of about 5 minutes, pans from one end of the restaurant to the other. This chapter is based upon the atmosphere of a Samuel Beckett teleplay entitled Ohio Impromptu, which was commissioned towards the end of Samuel Beckett's life by The Ohio State University, where I replaced the Ode to Lost Love with the Ode of Lost Work, or Pride and Work, if you will. Here, these guys, again, in a kind of oblique way, are discussing loss and displacement in the town that they still live in. The twinning between the two was kind of important to me. It's something I've done before in a video you'll see in a little bit. And here's a drawing for 20th Century Hustlers. Drawings are like yay big. And that brings us to across the street. So I've never talked about this piece. I'm kind of interested, so if it's slightly less than eloquent, please bear with me. It's actually similar, 20th Century Hustlers, that I was interested in dealing with archetypes. Again, like who and what are the figures in society that have meaning. So I'll start here, even though this is not the first thing you see. This photograph hung high on a provisional wall is entitled Backstory. And what we're looking at is, to archaeologists, the oldest known mine. It's in the Dolomites on the kind of Swiss-Italian border. And it is an ancient hole dug almost with hands into the earth. It is the beginning of the extraction industry. It's the beginning of technology. And one could argue that it's the beginning of the economy, right? It is how exchange really had its origin. That is placed into a kind of psychospatial context that I built there, made out of the cheapest industrialized materials you could find, all of it imported, built on site to spec. It is made to be temporary. Just as like therapy of groups, the conditionality of social relations was important to me. Placed into the room are 3 sculptures cast in bronze and aluminum that I call characters. You have, here's some of the provisional architecture. It was important to me that you could never see these characters at the same time. Our social relations are only partial, right? No one has an all-encompassing view of the power systems and the world that they live under. And I wanted the environment to kind of mirror the position we all find ourselves in. We have the observer, the flag bearer. The images look kind of distorted. And the businessman. They are bound, healed, or repaired in some places. You know, part of this, after World War II, we were left with a really stable system, right? It was relatively binary in a lot of the world, you know, Cold War. And under a system that increasingly gave primary energy to liquidity and ease of exchange, right? A lot of people call it neoliberalism. It seems clear to me that we're at the end of that, right? We're entering a new system that we don't really know what it is. To be direct, I think Saudi is a big part of that, right? That's why I was excited to do this biennial at this time with this project. Under that, what is the role of weight, right? These traditional values that I champion as a sculptor, like weight's kind of not cool in the modern economy, right? What is the role of the body and figuration? Where do monuments stand? Where does masculinity stand? These are all things that are being redefined. And I'm interested in those questions. I think they're legit questions to ask. But how does sculpture in particular find its home in that? Was something, you know, I don't have the answers to those questions, but those are the questions I was asking in the studio when I was working on these projects. So here there's a kind of like pathos to this guy, right? The businessman is a failed monument or a failed sculpture. The rebar that was the rest of them is sticking out. This is a composite image borrowed from a 14th century Bavarian wooden statue, which I am a big fanboy of this artistic movement. That is an allegory for debt. And again, here's a drawing for the project. The angles of attack of the work are something that I was really interested in, and I think I can get better at, honestly, like how you enter and are allowed and cut off in the space was something I spent a lot of time thinking about. I love De Chirico and the kind of metaphysics of space that he championed. He was not like a surrealist. The surrealists get kind of cheesy for me, but there's a hardness to De Chirico that I really appreciate. He really dealt with the kind of isolation of the body in a public space, and putting kind of all the energy onto that figure in the space, with the space itself. That is something that's always been a really big influence. I couldn't even, I knew that when I was like 18 years old, and I could not have articulated it as well as hopefully I did just now, but he's always been in my pantheon, and especially in this piece with things, oh, there's one more, sorry. Rodin also, like all these sculptures are in effect collages, right? I take different elements, I put them together, a shoe, a piece of wood, jeans, then I unify those things into something that has autonomy, right? In a traditional 19th century sculptural way, I believe in object autonomy. The objects start out as composite. They become autonomous through the process of casting. The champion of that was Rodin. So Rodin was postmodern before the term existed. He made his sculptures by combining, especially the good late stuff, he made his stuff by combining many different elements rather than like the traditional idea of the sculptor carving the stone or whatever. That's not how he worked. It was a process of collage that was then unified into a final form, much the same way that I'm working here. Anyway, this is the Cherico reference that I was trying to find. This slide should have gone after that, honestly. The idea of the public arch, which is a civic form in many, many cultures, is something I stole from him. And almost as a coda to the mine at the beginning, this is the first headquarters in Redmond, Washington of Microsoft. It is if the beginning of the economy was this extraction from that hole, the beginning of the end of the material economy was, Windows 84 and begun here. Don DeLillo said that art is inseparable from the world that provokes it, seen here with a cat. And I always thought that was like a kind of good, only a great novelist could write statement about what I think art can do. This idea of the kind of figure in a metaphysical space, I also have tried to do that without the sculptures. Here we have an earlier project called Civil Evil that is a series of concrete barriers built into kind of a high modernist gallery. It was important for me that these were not architecture. They're not 6 feet tall like it is across the way, but they're like 5 feet 4. So they're barriers. They're not architecture. Just a little bit taller than me, dividing the space into 4. In each of the quadrants, you have a kind of different sculptural moment. Here we have an image taken from the Hubble telescope, seen here. Basically, that image on the cinder is literally at a mechanical level as far as we can see. That is the edge of human perception, or a kind of like mechanical sublime. It is paired with a man who had his eye taken out, knocked out in a civil uprising in Chicago in 1968. In another quadrant, we have a kind of gallows-like structure from which is hanging a cast lead bell. The lead was taken from a military training range south of Chicago. So, like I said maybe earlier, materials carry history. Like, you don't need to know that that's melted down bullets, but the sculpture needs to know, right? It's important to me, or it's important to the sculpture, rather. So you have these spaces that the body, it's hard to talk about in a slide lecture, but you have these spaces that really put the pressure on your body, right? You are made aware of how tall you are, how big you are, how small you are in relationship to the compression that hopefully the cinder block provides. In a way, I'm more interested in producing a sculpture that is the id of a society rather than its conscience. You don't need to know exactly what the moral systems are being discussed explicitly, but the psychology of what it does to your space and what it does to your affect is really what I'm most interested in. In the same show, in the downstairs gallery of the same museum, I produced a video entitled Drama. This video was made at the headquarters of Goldman Sachs in Chicago, Illinois. And it also has two protagonists that are doubled like 20th Century Hustlers. I call them ghosts. Maybe we can play that now? This is, again, a clip. I mean, the social imagination, you know, like how we think about things, it's made through play, right? Like we try things, try different things. And the kind of archaic exchange that these guys are engaged in, adding up to nothing, to me seemed like a good way to sort of poke a finger and make fun of the kind of dematerialization of Goldman Sachs, the place where it was actually shot. It's on 5 monitors, right? So almost like a kind of kaleidoscopic effect. The video is made to be, it's the same video on all 5, but it is started at different moments in the linear timeline. So you have different scenes of the same thing appearing simultaneously. And there's no dialogue in this one. It's just the kind of new age music that you hear. That is out the window of Goldman Sachs, not in the video, just an image out the window. You know, this, I mean, I've mentioned it already, but this, the role of weight that I was just talking about with People in Reverse is discussed in its absence in the video that we're just looking at, in that Goldman Sachs is all about arbitrage, right? How little material do you need to exchange to make money? And so these ghosts are performing a similar game. Abstraction is something I think about a lot. I think I have a love-hate relationship with it, or perhaps an Oedipal relationship with it. You know, one person dies, it's a tragedy. 30 million people die, it's abstract. You can't even think about it. I think abstraction art can operate much the same way. I mean, how many companies that do evil deals all over the world have beautiful abstract paintings in their lobbies, right? This is something I'm inherently suspicious of. At the same time, I was raised in a bourgeois culture where this is art, right? My mom loves this stuff, right? And that always made me have a little bit of a push and pull with it. This is Rothko, by the way. When I first moved to Chicago from San Francisco, I was lonely, super lonely. And I filled a lot of that time by going to basically the bowels of the bureaucratic state in Chicago. I would go to police press conferences. I would go to city hall press conferences. I got a press pass. It was just something that, because of the work I do, I was really interested to see what are the mechanics of power? What does that actually do? It's boring. Most of the time, power is exercised in the most banal of ways. However, one time I went to a press conference, this was not intentional, it just happened to be, where a young boy was murdered. And it was captured and broadcast on YouTube. And even a city as violent as Chicago, it was traumatizing. People freaked out, this was a bridge too far, even where I live. And the energy in the room was pretty intense. And with a very high resolution camera, I took a bunch of photographs. And over years, literally years, in a series of collage, both physical collage and digital collage, augmentations and manipulations to the images I took, I produced this. And this is a very long title. The piece we're looking at is entitled "The Morally Ambiguous President of Abstraction, Police Press Conference, Chicago, 2009. I could be wrong about that. And I was really interested, where does social content fade away, right? This is a remnant of a pretty horrific moment, but we're looking at what I hope is a beautiful image. It also happens to be the same exact size of the Rothkos we were just looking at in the earlier images, intentionally. And that subversiveness I thought was dangerous and interesting. And I had guilt about it, or questions, what is the morality of taking this horrific thing and turning it into an image? I think those are issues that artists deal with all the time, and they should. And subversiveness is dangerous because it requires a lot of trust in the audience, right? When you do something subversive in art in a society, you're trusting the audience to not only read it, but know that they are receiving a wound and not being encouraged to cause a wound to others. And that is a really dangerous, complex territory to operate in any society, right? All societies have codes. It also made me really uncomfortable. Collectors love this thing, right? It was pretty and abstract and made me never want to do it again. But I think it was an interesting project. It was an interesting project for me. And finally, similar, I suppose, these are entitled Modern Ensembles. And a little backstory, what you are looking at is a suite of 3 plexiglass cubes about yay big. Each one's slightly different, kind of very elegantly proportioned cubes made out of ballistic plexiglass, so basically bulletproof plexiglass. I went on to the dark web, the illegal internets, and downloaded instructions how to produce IEDs, which are the weapon of choice in asymmetrical warfare everywhere in the world. They're basically homemade bombs. And I detonated these IEDs inside the void of the plexiglass cubes. And so it's C4, the trigger, the explosive material, the trigger, along with chemicals that when they oxidize produce colors. So for example, aluminum at extremely high temperature turns purple, and all these colors. And so we're looking here at a literal aestheticization of violence. And I think, I just wanted these objects at a very kind of primal level to make you feel beauty, but also to make you feel that kind of catch when you realize what you're looking at is both beautiful and comes from a place that incorporates pain to others. And I think that's, I'll leave it there. I think that's actually one of the greatest things art can do. In my mind, a key to a vigorous culture is one that cultivates emotion in public, right? Like one that has a climate of public debate that is not only based on reason, but also feeling. And I think art, that's kind of our job as artists. Thank you. Do you guys have any questions? In the void.
And they resisted the explosion, like.
It's a good question. I love the technical questions. Those things are super expensive, and I ruined a lot of them. So just on the real, I made the IED exactly like I downloaded it, which was obviously way too powerful, right? So the first 3, I just blew it to smithereens. So I dialed down the C4 and also built a plywood mother mold. So it blew up. So it was the plex, and then it had a support structure of the ply that helped keep it in. But it was also dialed down. Like, in my artist talk, I say it's an IED, but basically I made a really, really powerful firecracker,
I have a question. I'm not sure if it's a good question or not, but you were speaking about abstract art and how you, let's say, you don't like it or you don't...
Suspicious.
Yeah, suspicious. I think I have the same feelings somehow. Yet what you do is in itself abstract. So how do you see the difference between...
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question, not a bad question. Hopefully, my work is perhaps socially abstract, right? But not aesthetically abstract. Like, with the exception of the project that was about abstraction, sorry. Oh, it won't let me do it. Sorry. Well, with the exception of the project that's about abstraction, most of my work deals with recognizable form, right? But it is how those recognizable things are recontextualized and put into a new context is where the social abstraction comes in. And it is my hope that what people sometimes call alienation or derangement can sort of make you question or think about the relationship you have with those things every day, right? Like if you see an IED in a new context, in a new way, doing a new thing, maybe you'll think about the relations of power, or maybe you'll think about what makes violence so appealing to every human being. Like, people love movies where people get shot, right? Like, what's up with that? But the work, the stuff needs to be, again, the term that I was taught is alienated to have that conversation. Am I answering your question? Yeah.
Okay, hello.
Hi.
Uh, you're talking about the useful art. Is that mean that you are inspiring your arts from the usual life things, like the businessman, sculptor? I didn't quite understand why it's like this.
Why I'm calling it useful art?
Yeah.
Yeah. The art that I champion serves a social function, right? Art helps people figure out the values of their society. It's not just pretty, right? It's not just for like a rich guy to hang on his wall. It can be all those things. I am not against that, right? But the work that I want to produce helps both produce and comprehend meaning. And in that is a tool. That is a social function. That is useful.
Useful for social,
For us.
for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Hi, Geof, how are you? I was wondering if you would elaborate on the spatial choices for this artwork in relation to the sculptures. Yes,
That one.
the one at the Biennale.
Yeah. I can try. I think I was trying to do two things, and if I'm really vulnerable, I don't know if I was successful, but there's two things I was interested in. One is the uniformity of production, right? These are almost entirely off-the-shelf items, like things you can buy on the internet, like that are set up on site in a temporary configuration. Also, I wanted to make a sort of very controlling public plaza. Like the corner is cut off. You have to go down that hallway. You can never really see two sculptures at the same time, right? In our world, seeing the businessman and also seeing the flag bearer is kind of impossible. You have to have allegiance to the flag bearer, or you have to have allegiance to the businessman. You can't really have allegiance to both. And that is sort of what I was trying to give a kind of poetic embodiment of. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hello.
Hi.
I want to ask about abstraction, because I think abstraction is relative, especially social abstraction, like you talked about. Your work, maybe a lot of people may perceive as very American. So things that are abstract there may not be as abstract here, where, in other parts of the world, the societal values are, a lot of it
Different.
is different. So how do you feel about that?
Yeah. I think that I absolutely agree with you about everything you said. The first thing I would say is I can only make work from my own subjectivity. I'm like an American guy, so I make work from my own experience. And that's just full disclosure, one of the reasons I was curious to bring this type of subjectivity here. But beyond that, I think that I get from your question that you're suspicious of that. I actually present that as one of the kind of great things about art, right? Like someone produces work from their own perspective that is foreign to me, and it's a way that I can get to know something else. That's super romantic for sure, but I also think there's an element of truth in it. More technically, as an artist, what I try to do is deal with symbols that are not so specific that they are lost, but not so general that they are meaningless, like the businessman. That exists in every culture. Pathetic masculinity exists in every culture. And so I just kind of work from there. And that's what, honestly, I feel like I'm kind of good at. Like that finesse of doing that is sort of my shtick. But it's a constant challenge. And I think your question's fair.
Thanks. I'm not suspicious. It's actually also a question for us, the curators. I'm just curious to see if we think the same. Thank you.
Hello. First of all, thank you a lot for elaborating on your thought of process while doing a work. It's extremely interesting, and now I have a lot of ideas for my own work. My question, and I think it's technical, and I want to know if it's intentional or not. Most of the work, the space you choose, the walls are extremely white, and the lighting is very harshly white. Is this intentional?
The lighting is intentional. Walls in a gallery are white.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted, in this project, I think the lighting could be better over there. In next iterations, I'm going to make it better. I wanted the white to be uniform, and I wanted it to be without shadow, more or less without shadow.
Okay.
And that sort of, between the light, for me over there, the lights and the carpet are the same material. It just provides a kind of, the term is like tabula rasa. It provides a ground plane for the characters to act upon, like a stage. And so if you see the light, they're very regularly spaced, but then in certain parts, they're also very compositional, like they break that. So there's a choreography of how they work.
Okay, thank you. That's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. Last question? Okay. Well, as a painter, I'm immediately offended by your...
It's a great way to start a question, man.
No, I completely understand your take on, abstract paintings being kind of the go-to thing for rich people now, hanging on their walls and stuff like that. And I find it unfair to just demonize painting and its beauty in that sense, because eventually you're also selling your work that is against, capitalism and neoliberal. No,
I'm not against capitalism.
Oh, really?
Yeah, let's be clear. And I'm not. Well, I don't want to cut you off. Finish.
Well,
finish
yeah. Let me finish.
Yeah.
Just thinking that ultimately, no matter what you make, it will be sold, and it will participate in the market, but I don't think that just you can easily deny the value of, I don't know, abstract painting and its beauty just because it's a commodity eventually.
You done?
Maybe I'll come back later.
Okay. Maybe I misspoke. It's not the commodity that I have a problem with. It is abstraction, which exists in sculpture too. It's not even. It's not a problem with painting. I really love painting, and I think because I'm so bad at it, painting is like one of the few art forms I can just like be in awe of. The commodification of art, I don't have a problem with that. I'm a capitalist. I make art. I sell art. I want to sell art. Right? I think that you can have meaning and still make money. It's not an either or. I'm not.
But how do you define meaning? Because as a painter, I find meaning in painting, in abstract painting, in their beauty.
Sure.
Which is, and can you, or just thinking about pleasure, visual pleasure, could be a form of usefulness to the mind.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, different strokes for different folks. I'm just expressing my own ideology. But my suspicion is with abstraction and the absence of social legibility. that is, again, different strokes for different strokes. I love looking at, abstract era Philip Guston is one of my favorite types of art, right? But his arc into representation, I find like a really interesting parable for me. But, that's a controversial position. I totally understand and respect what you're saying. It's just not where my values lie. The thing I want to be really clear with is my argument is not against capitalism, right? It is against a certain aesthetic sensibility.
Because you don't like them, or I don't know. I'm kind of confused. Why are you against that kind of?
Why? Because I think, maybe we could talk about this after. But I mean, in short, because I think abstraction, the type that I am, throwing dirt upon, can easily just be camouflage for a certain type of nefariousness and a certain type of social numbing. But we can talk about more later.